Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel. May 4th, 2018.
The Kuhner Report is powered by Kelly Financial Services, cleaning up your financial bull. Get the peace of mind that you deserve at Kelly Financial Services.
105 here on the great WRKO. Okay, my friends, wow. I've got a story for you at 1:35. You want to talk about another bombshell in Mueller's war with Trump. A federal judge, just took it to Robert Mueller. You've got to see now the latest developments. Absolutely stunning in the Paul Manafort case. Now Mueller has been rocked by a federal judge who has now called out Mueller. I'm going to have all of this. Believe me, you don't want to miss it. Also, Scott Lively. He is challenging Baker. In fact, he stunned the political establishment in Massachusetts last weekend by winning nearly 30% of the delegates at the Republican State Convention. He needs 10,000 signatures to get on the ballot. He wants to do it with the help of Kuhner Country. I will have him on at 2:45 today to discuss that. In essence, he will be at the Worcester Town Hall, the birth of the Republican Party in Massachusetts, from 9 to 5 tomorrow. Please, if you can, go put your signature on a sheet of paper. Help him get signatures, sign, so he can get over 10,000, and we can get him on the ballot and give Charlie Faker a run for his money. A primary he'll never forget. But joining me now is the one and only Dr. Grace Vuoto, former editorial writer and columnist at the Washington Times. She's also a communications director for the Boston Broadside. To me, my favorite print publication in all of Massachusetts. Dr. Grace, how are you today?
Well, I'm okay, Jeff. Thank you for having me on.
Full disclosure, she's also my better half. She's the brains in the family, as they say, but let that go. Dr. Grace, I want to talk about your column. As always, very interesting, very provocative, always well written. But before I get to your column, which everybody can read at thebostonbroadside.com, you've been doing a lot of research into the House Intelligence Committee report on Trump's alleged collusion with Russia. What did the committee find, and what was the most shocking thing to you?
Jeff, honestly, I encourage every American to read the report because I'm actually literally sickened by the report. I'm sickened by what they found regarding how sloppy the FBI and our intelligence community is, and how we have been played by the Russians. Now, let me explain. First of all, the first thing that everyone has to know is that this report was intended to be widely disseminated, and yet the Justice Department is claiming that a lot of it is classified and preventing the public from having access to all of the information in it. And I know why they don't want us to have access. Is because if you read even what we do have access to, it shows how incompetent they are. The incompetency began during the Obama administration. For example, there's a section about Russian activities beginning in 2015 and 2016, and so much of that is all blacked out. There's a section, basically any time you have real information that the public needs to know, provide its proper context about what we're dealing with, it's blacked out. And when there is information that is revealed, it is shocking, because it's shocking in the sense that it shows us how incompetent everybody has been in handling this. So the report basically says that the Russians have been messing all over the world, and they started to mess with us too. And the idiots in the Obama administration, they began to, become aware of it, but they didn't do much about it. Then the FBI starts to notice that the Russians are trying to hack the DNC. And they notify the DNC, but they do it in a very half-hearted manner. And in retrospect, they're all telling themselves, we didn't do enough to warn the DNC. You have testimony by leaders of the Justice Department saying, we blame ourselves, we didn't do enough. And there's also testimony that when they did warn the DNC, The DNC didn't take them seriously enough. So you have this incompetence every step of the way. But the moment that really literally gave me chills up and down my spine when I was reading the report, Steele asked for help from the Russians. So the Russians fed Steele information, and then Steele gave the information based on Russian intelligence sources to the State Department. Now, Jeff, check this out. The State Department knew that the Russians were monkeying around with us. And then they rely on a report based on Russian sources.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
It gave me chills because even if you assume, let's just assume, just for 1 second, just for the sake of argument, that Hillary Clinton and everybody that received the report really just believed all of this, that they just believed it was true. You've got to ask the question, you idiot, you're relying on the Russians. And you know you're also being briefed at the same time that the Russians are spreading disinformation. So what is astonishing about the report is you ask yourself, how much of this mess is actually a very successful Russian plot? They fed misinformation to the deep state. The deep state knew they were receiving misinformation, and yet they bought some misinformation hook, line, and sinker.
That is very interesting. We're speaking with Dr. Grace Vuoto. She's the communications director and a columnist at the Boston Broadside. Full disclosure, she's also my wife, my better half. Dr. Grace, I know that Chairman Devin Nunes has been extremely upset that so much of this report was redacted. In fact, page after page, paragraph after paragraph, it's all blacked out. And he says that's deliberate on the part of the deep state, the Justice Department, and the FBI to prevent the truth from coming out. But what you're saying, hold on, but what you're saying is this. The Russians wanted to undermine our democracy. And they've essentially paralyzed us for the last 16 months. With all of this Russia collusion, Trump, the Steele dossier, the golden showers at this hotel in Moscow, and you're almost saying that Hillary Clinton, the State Department, and the FBI were unwitting accomplices of perhaps a Russian intelligence operation to paralyze and undermine our democracy. Am I wrong?
Oh, bingo. What's most disturbing is this. If you just assume for one moment that everybody on the other side that's going on about Russian collusion is sincere, just assume for 1 second. They're sincere. They're really alarmed about this. Well, we just have to tell them, guys, the initial basis of all this is Russian sources. Do you understand that? That's what the House Intelligence Report has uncovered. That this all began by information fed to us directly from Russian intelligence. Now think about this for a moment. You are in the Kremlin, Jeff, and I want the audience to imagine that. And you hear word that the Americans are coming to you for some information on Donald Trump. What do you think that they did? They said, they just played right into our heads. They're coming to us for information about one of their candidates. Let's really mess them up. And that's what they did. And one of the reasons that the FBI is covering up is not so much because they're covering up that they're out to get Trump. What they're covering out is their incompetence. Remember this. All bureaucracies ultimately become very incompetent over time. And that's what you're seeing. The intelligence report even says this. It says, we analyze the tradecraft. Like, how is our intelligence community getting their information? They said, well, when it came to assessing that the Russians were meddling with us, they used good tradecraft. But when it came to Putin's motives, their tradecraft is very poor. Every step of the way, you see that this intelligence report is saying alarm bells to the American people. The Justice Department needs dramatic reform, not necessarily because they're evil or malicious, although some elements would be that way, but because they're extremely incompetent. That is the overwhelming conclusion. And what I found chilling, literally got chills up down my spine, was the Russians exploited that incompetence. And they exploited the idiots at the Hillary State Department. Those idiots, hook, line, and sinker, bought what the Russians were feeding them. And I think this whole time, the intelligence community that messed us up and they're watching our cable news, they're probably laughing every day. And we are fools because we are at each other's throats, and that's exactly what they wanted.
Dr. Grace, I want to get to your column because I think it's a very provocative and a very interesting column. But I just want to ask you, not just Devin Nunes now, many House Republicans, in fact, many Americans now are outraged that Rod Rosenstein refuses to now hand over to Congress, as they have asked multiple times, the so-called scope memo, the initial memo that established Robert Mueller as the special counsel and his special investigation that lays out the quote-unquote scope of his investigation. What authority does he have? What can he look into? What he can't look into? What areas are proper for investigating? What areas are not proper? Rosenstein refuses to hand that over. Do you think that the deep state is hiding behind this shield of secrecy? This almost, national security, we can't get into that. It's an ongoing investigation. Are they hiding behind this so-called secrecy to essentially run wild and do whatever they want to do?
I think they are definitely hiding behind a shield of secrecy. This very, very brilliant and well-crafted report, obviously the people that put it together, they're aware of what's classified and what's not. You see just the extent of the redactions, and you say, this is ridiculous. It almost becomes unreadable. Why are you doing this? It's very obvious that they're covering up. But, Jeff, I honestly believe that a lot of the so-called cover-up has to do with how incompetent they are. And they're trying, some individuals are trying simply to protect their job. You know, we saw that a lot when you and I were in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of incompetent people who are power-hungry, and then when they get caught, they start a series of lies. And it's not necessarily that they're out to get somebody, it's that they're just trying to cover up their own rear end. And that's what you see really in this report. And I also want to say this. I know a lot of us are very depressed nowadays about the Republicans not fulfilling their agenda, but I got to give them a lot of credit for putting this report out. This is really the first official report that we have, and it completely exonerates Donald Trump. And if there's one reason to go out and vote for Republican House members at least, it's for giving us this incredible piece of information. This is great ammo, and I don't think that we conservatives have yet even begun to fully explore everything that's in it. I'm going to start writing a series of columns on just what they've put together. This is a year of work, and we got to give them a lot of credit because it was hard work to put this together, and it really exonerates Donald Trump completely. It even blames the intelligence community. They asked this simple question. Well, when you guys were afraid that there was so much Russian interference, why didn't you brief the senior members of the Trump campaign earlier and tell them, be careful, they might penetrate your campaign? So a lot of the blame, even if you say there were some ill-advised contacts between the Trump team and some of the Russians that were trying to penetrate, a lot of the blame still goes to the intelligence community because they weren't vigorous enough in warning American politicians about what was going on.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Dr. Grace, I only got a couple minutes left. You got a very interesting column, and I know it sums up the feelings of some conservative Trump supporters. You're a big supporter of Trump. You believe in his America First agenda. However, you are disappointed, and many are, that Trump essentially showed himself to have lied about Stormy Daniels. First, he said he didn't know how she was paid. He had no idea about the payment to her. He had nothing to do with the payment. And of course, it comes out now that he reimbursed his own lawyer, Michael Cohen. And of course, he knew about the nature of the payment, at least to some extent. The Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial today saying, Mr. President, you have to come clean. Don't lie about Stormy Daniels. Listen to Neil Cavuto say this. Roll it, Jared.
So let me be clear, Mr. President. How can you drain the swamp if you're the one who keeps muddying the waters? You didn't know about that $130,000 payment to a porn star until you did. Said you knew nothing about how your former lawyer, Michael Cohen, handled this until acknowledging today you were the guy behind the retainer payment that took care of this. You insist that money from the campaign or campaign contributions played no role in this transaction. Of that, you're sure. Thing is, not even 24 hours ago, sir, you couldn't recall any of this, and you seem very sure. Now, I'm not saying you're a liar, you're president, you're busy. I'm just having a devil of a time figuring out which news is fake. None of this makes what you say fake. Just calling out the press for being so a bit of a stretch. You are right to say some of them are out to get you, but oftentimes they're using your own words to bash you. Your base probably might not care, but you should. I guess you've been too busy draining the swamp to ever stop and smell the stink you're creating. That's your doing. That's your stink. Mr. President, that's your swamp.
Dr. Grace, I've only got a minute left. Go.
Jeff, I was revolted by the recent revelations by Giuliani, really revolted. Trump obviously has been lying, and the sad thing is he didn't need to hush up Stormy Daniels. In 2016, had she come forward, we would have all shrugged it off like we shrugged off all the other women that came forward, because ultimately we know he's a playboy. That's not a secret. You know, when we elected him, we didn't say, this is a guy that we want to marry our daughters. Honestly, if Trump wanted to marry Ava, I would say, get lost. You're not coming anywhere near my daughter. And I know a lot of people who voted him feel the same way. So we knew that he's a playboy. He didn't have to lie about it. He didn't have to hush her up. She should have just told her story. We would have just chalked it up as, Trump loves the busty babes. We got it. Now, we all disapprove, many of us, but we applaud him for being courageous enough to smash political correctness and take on Hillary Clinton. That's enough of a hero. He didn't have to overdo it, and I'm deeply disappointed that he's been lying for months about it, and I do think it tarnishes his credibility.
We have been talking with Dr. Grace Vuoto. You can check out her latest column. Grace, what's the latest column called?
It's called Supporting Trump in the Age of Caligula.
All right,
so at thebostonbroadside.com.
At thebostonbroadside.com. I urge all of you to read it. She makes some really interesting arguments about Trump, Giuliani, Stormy Daniels, all of it. Dr. Grace, as always, original dynamite stuff. We'll see you next Friday.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Take care. 617-266-6868. Okay, let me ask you. Are you disappointed in Trump for having lied about Stormy Daniels, or do you just not care? And coming up at 1:35, you don't want to miss it. Mueller gets smacked down by a federal judge. Ho ho! Huge breaking story. Your calls, that story. Don't touch that dial. Okay, my friends, a lot of breaking news. You don't want to miss it. Trust me when I tell you this. More now from President Trump. He says he wants to sit down with Robert Mueller. Ay, ay, ay. And a federal judge smacks down Robert Mueller. You got to hear it to believe it. But first, 617, we'll do that at 1:35, I promise. But first, 617-266-6868 is the number. Let me ask you this. Is an affair with a porn star 12 years ago a $130,000 hush payment? By the way, I don't believe he had an affair. What? He had a one-night stand with Stormy Daniels? I don't believe it. This is where Dr. Grace and I genuinely disagree. He's a germaphobe. I know Trump is a germaphobe. That he would have had unprotected sex with a porn star? I don't believe it. Honestly, I don't believe it. But this, for the sake of argument, okay, let's just assume, for the sake of argument, he did have a one-night stand with her. There's a $130,000 hush payment. As Rudy Giuliani recently said on Fox, on Sean Hannity's show, this was a reimbursement. He was reimbursed from Trump through his retainer, so there's no campaign finance violation. Let's say there was a campaign finance violation. Just, again, for the sake of argument. Is having hush payments, $130,000, a technical violation of campaign finance law over a consensual one-night stand 12 years ago with a porn star? Is that grounds for impeaching the President of the United States? The mainstream media and the left now say yes. And the fact that Trump had denied that he had ever paid Stormy Daniels or paid Michael Cohen or knew anything about the payment. That now that he's changed his story, has that hurt his credibility in your eyes? Lou in Rhode Island, you're up next. Go ahead, Lou.
Well, first on the last issue that you touched on, absolutely not. This is whatever it is. It's a victimless crime. It's not even a crime. It's a one night stand if it even existed. It hurt no one. As far as a campaign contribution, they don't investigate a campaign contribution when Donna Brazile, who worked for a network at that time, was helping Hillary with questions in her debate with Bernie Sanders. That's a contribution, too, made by a network and a network person, but they don't investigate that. And not only that, the Clintons used to have these bimbo eruption squads. The media, nobody cared about them. Nobody even bothered to even give a hoot about the bimbo eruption. On the second thing, on the point that Grace was making before, I mean, the whole Russia thing is very interesting, but I look at the Russia thing a little bit differently than Dr. Grace seems to. The Russia thing is a foil. It's a means by which the Democrats and their pals in the media and the rhinos, they're using anything from Russia to overturn the presidency and get rid of the results of the election. That's what they're using it for. They could not care less what Russia did, even if Russia didn't do much or didn't do anything. They're using that to try to overthrow the Trump administration, as you've been saying over and over again, in a coup, right?
Lou, a federal judge, please, at 1:35, you got to listen to this. Almost word for word, what you just said is what a federal judge now told Robert Mueller's lawyers to their faces. It's incredible. Lou, as always, great call. By the way, let me just throw quickly one other quick point. I know we're up against it. Hillary Clinton, it's now been revealed, her campaign laundered $84 million in illegal campaign contributions. Not $130,000 to a former porn star. $84 million. I don't see the FBI investigating that. Nobody's kicking Hillary's door down. I'm just saying. 617-266-6868. Okay, listen to this. I hope he's kidding. I really hope he's kidding. President Trump says he's more than ready to talk to Robert Mueller and set the facts straight. Nick Bovey is in the WRKO newsroom. He has the latest on the president's comments. Nick, I'm telling you, the whole audience is listening right now. What did President Trump say?
Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel.
$137 here on the great WRKO. Okay, my friends, absolute bombshell story. I'm going to get to it in about 30 seconds. But let me just make a final point about Stormy Daniels. Of course, we're going to continue to take your calls, I promise. 617-266-6868 is the number. Here is a great text from 617. Jeff, Stormy Daniels, this washed-up porn star, admits to blackmail and extortion. How come she's not in jail? 617? I mean, boom, baby. I mean, drop the mic. That's another point no one's mentioning in all this. She's the one, I'm just giving you the facts. She's the one that reached out to Cohen and said, I'm going to tell my story. And I'm going to tell the National Enquirer and In Touch magazine and whatever, everybody. And unless you give me an NDA. Okay, so basically she's blackmailing and extorting him. So I'm going to go on about how we had sex. And it was, by the way, her first story in 2011, you can look it up. She claimed they had sexual relations 4 times. Now it was only once. And by the way, when she talked about the 4 times, she never said how she didn't like the sex. She never mentioned that. But no. Now it was only once, and oh boy, did I hate it. Oh, it was torture sleeping with this guy. So she went from 4 times to 1 time. Then she wrote a letter, legally bound letter, where she said, no, we never had sex, to reversing herself and saying, no, well, we did have sex. So anyway, she goes to the lawyer and says, I'm gonna go out there and claim that this guy was sleeping with me, and we had sex 4 times and we had an affair. So either give me my money or I'm going to go to the tabloid. So he said, okay, what's your price? 130. Okay, 130. You want 130? Here's 130. We just want to keep this quiet. We don't care. My client doesn't need the hassle here, and signed the NDA. She was blackmailing and extorting the guy. She wanted the non-disclosure agreement. She wanted $130,000. To me, it's as clear as the sky is blue. So how come she's not being prosecuted for that, for blackmail and extortion, never mind violating the terms of the non-disclosure agreement? If Jared and I, get into an NDA, if I violate the NDA, I'm in trouble. I'm in big legal jeopardy. That's in the real world. That's what happens. You sign a legal document. You agree to a legally binding terms. Now, did you get your payment? Yes. Did you cash in your payment? Yes. Were you happy for at least a year or 2 or what? Yes. Then you figured, hey, I've got a book deal. I've got Hollywood knocking on my door. I got people willing to pay, $20, $30, $40,000 to see me give them a lap dance. Whoa, I can make millions out of this and wiggle my rear end. And now suddenly I'll give you the money back. Well, that's not how non-disclosure agreements work. So no one's mentioning that very simple fact, okay? But as I like to say, let that go. Listen to this. Whoa, okay. Finally, somebody said it. Finally. Okay, listen to this. So, as you know, here's the context to understand what the judge is now, why the judge smacked down Robert Mueller. As you know, they are trying to prosecute Paul Manafort. And essentially, he was a Trump campaign manager for a while before Trump fired him. Manafort has been a long-time lobbyist in Washington, D.C. He shills for the Republicans. He shills for the Democrats. And the big thing about Manafort, he's a foreign lobbyist. So he takes money from a lot of countries. And so Robert Mueller, out to get Paul Manafort, has now indicted him on a series of charges, by the way, that have nothing to do with Russia collusion. Nothing. It's essentially bank fraud. It's essentially a money laundering from the Turkish government, from other governments that they say were illegally funneled through the Cyprus and the Cayman Islands, and that basically they engaged in tax fraud, bank fraud. They didn't fully disclose all of these donations. They illegally pocketed some of these donations. And this goes back way before the Trump campaign to 2005. So basically the tactic is clear. We'll find something in Manafort's background, and then we're going to try to squeeze him to give us something on Russia collusion. Well, Manafort has nothing to give him because there was no Russia collusion. So now Mueller is taking him to court, and they want to throw the book at him. So here is the context. Remember, it was Paul Manafort. This is unheard of. We're talking about white-collar crime. They literally broke into his home, the FBI did, Mueller's people, kicked his door down at 3 o'clock in the morning. His wife was dragged out of the house in her pajamas, yelling and screaming. The kids were crying. They were taking everything from Manafort's home. They took all of his computers, his files, his documents, his personal cell phones. They took everything, even though Manafort was completely cooperating with the special prosecutor's office. So they used stormtrooper Gestapo-like tactics in the middle of the night. So now they're in court. This occurred about maybe 30 minutes ago. They're in front of a U.S. District Judge, T.S. Ellis. The federal judge looking at Mueller's lawyers, and he literally told them to their face. Here's what he said, quote, "You don't really care about Mr. Manafort." So he told the Mueller team in the courtroom. "You really care about what information Mr. Manafort can give you to lead you to Mr. Trump and an impeachment or whatever. He then told them to their face that they are out of control and that they're now exercising complete and utter unfettered power. And more than that, he says, you guys have lied to me. Your team has engaged in naked and blatant lying. You are lying about the nature of the Paul Manafort investigation. You are lying about your powers to be able to investigate Manafort, and you have been lying to me about many of your activities which are beyond the scope of your investigation. He then, to their face, said, quote, I want the unredacted scope memo. I want to see it. In other words, I talked about it with Dr. Grace. This is the one document that Rod Rosenstein does not want to hand over to Congress, even though he has to, because Congress has the right of oversight, which is the original memo that Rod Rosenstein crafted when he appointed Robert Mueller. And it lays out the quote-unquote, that's why it's called a scope memo, the scope of his investigation. It lays out, okay, here's your mandate, here's your authority, here's what you can investigate, here's what you can't investigate. Here's what you can look into, here's what you can't look into. Now, what we have been told from everybody involved, that the authority of Mueller and the mandate of Mueller was to investigate Russia collusion. So Judge T.S. Ellis here drops the hammer on Mueller's legal team. He then right away says, you are using evidence against Paul Manafort from an earlier Department of Justice probe that had nothing to do with your office. You can't do that. That's illegal. You don't have the authority to do that. I want to see the scope of your memo. I want to see what kind of authority you have. And furthermore, what gives you the right to go after Paul Manafort? Remember, Mueller's the one that's prosecuting him. What does this have to do with Russia? I don't see Russia or Putin or the Kremlin or the 2016 campaign anywhere on this indictment. We're going back to bank fraud, the Cayman Islands in 2005. What basis do you have to even indict him? You have no basis to indict him. Quote, according to the judge, hold on, I just want to get this quote exactly correct. Here's what he said. He says to them, quote unquote, that the special counsel's office said he was not persuaded because their argument was that this is an ongoing investigation and that national security matters that cannot be public disclosed. So you see, again, they're hiding behind this veil or shield of secrecy. Ellis, according now to the news wires, quote, was not amused and was not persuaded. He summed up the special counsel's office as, quote, we said this was what the investigation was about, but we are not bound by it, and we were lying. He then used, this phrase that's often used by, if you watch the NFL, when there's like a ridiculous play or a ridiculous a decision by the referee, come on, man. He literally goes to Mueller's lawyers, come on, man. Like, this is BS. This is bullcrap. He then told them he wants the government to hand over the unredacted, no redactions, scope memo in 2 weeks, or not. If they don't, they better provide a really good explanation why not. And he says if they don't provide a very good explanation, he's just going to throw the charges out. So here, a couple of quotes, and then I want to throw it open to you. Quote, you don't really care about Mr. Manafort's bank fraud. According to the wires, talking to prosecutor Michael Dreeben, one of Mueller's top prosecutors, at times losing his temper. Ellis said prosecutors were interested in Manafort because of his potential to provide material that would lead to Trump's prosecution or impeachment. That's what you're really interested in, said Ellis. He then went on to say, you have no basis to investigate Manafort. You have no basis to indict Manafort. And I'm asking for the scope memo. And you guys are telling me you can't give me the scope memo. Quote, we don't want anyone in this country with unfettered power. It's unlikely you're going to persuade me the special prosecutor has anything to do, has power to do anything he or she wants. The American people feel pretty strongly that no one has unfettered power. When the special prosecutor said, well, we found this in the course of our investigation into the Trump collusion, the campaign, that's why we're bringing these charges against Manafort, the judge shot back, none of this information has to do with information related to Russian government coordination and the campaign of Donald Trump. In fact, as he told them to their face, you are lying. And you continue to lie to me and to this court. So, in a nutshell, you have a federal judge that has now called out Robert Mueller's Gestapo tactics, and that's what they are, saying you are now engaged in a massive abuse of power, in a witch hunt of Paul Manafort. You're only going after him because you want to bring this president down. It's as clear as the light of day, and that you do not have the authority to indict this man. And that you have been perpetrating a fraud upon the court. You have been lying to me, you have been lying to this court, and you have been lying to the American people. He said it better than anybody in the administration has had the guts to say so far, with the exception, obviously, of President Trump. My prediction based off of this, he's going to knock off all the charges, drop all the charges against Manafort. He's going to undercut the basis of the Mueller investigation. My friends, Robert Mueller is in big trouble. And it's thanks to this federal judge. He's been exposed for the thug, the hack, and the stormtrooper that he is. John in New Hampshire, you're up next. Thanks for holding and welcome.
Thank you. You know, everybody's making a big deal out of this. I don't get it. He who was without sin cast the first stone. And if I was perfect, who's God? All the presidents, most of them, had done things like that. But he was single. He can do anything he wants to do. He's single. What's wrong with these people making a big deal out of this? I don't get it.
Well, John, let me ask you, do you think the American people will stand for them trying to impeach him for a hush payment, $130,000 to a washed-up porn star who alleged that they had a one-night stand when he was a private citizen 12 years ago?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if they're stupid, you know, but you must listen to Mess NBC on TV, right? I call it Mess. MSNBC.
Or MSLSD.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Those unbelievable. That's all they talk about.
Oh, I know. It's Russia, 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 stormy, stormy, stormy. You know, and they think they got him. I'm like, okay, bring it on. You want to impeach on this? Honestly, John, be my guest. Be my guest. He'll have 90% of the American people behind him on this.
The more they talk about it, the more I'm going to vote for him.
John, thank you for that call.
It's funny that the free love crowd all of a sudden has an issue with somebody freely expressing their love.
No, that's a good point, Jared. They're so sexually liberal for so many years. They backed Bill Clinton. I mean, you name it. Ted Kennedy. I could go on and on.
They created genders so that they could have a bigger sexual experience. And now this. I can't do that. Cisgender weirdo.
Susan in Tewksbury, you're up next. Thanks for holding and welcome.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Listen, I was just thinking about this $130,000 with Stormy.
Yes.
It just seems really weird that amount of money. And I think, she really knew what she was doing. I think there must have been some sort of like a bidding war going on with somebody. Because why not 150? Why not 100,000? It ends up maybe 125, and she's no. I'm going to go $5,000 more, 130. Oh, all right, shut up, and it's done. So I think she really knew what she was doing, and she is trying to extract money from him, whether it's true or not. That's to be seen. And I want to understand why it takes 2 weeks to get this information presented.
The scope memo?
Yes.
No, I know. I mean, they could do it today.
Well, I think that gives them time to concoct up something. Conjure up something.
Well, I think that's what's going to happen, Susan.
They invent something and then they go after it.
Susan, you're completely right. Honestly, thank you for that call. Look, in fact, if you want to know the actual details, she was, originally Michael, they were going back. She wanted 100,000. She said she wanted 100K. So she said that was her going in. That was going to be her minimum. They went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So Michael Cohen says, okay, 125, get lost. She's the one that said, because she said she was so desperate for money. She said, make it 130. 130 and I'll sign. So the last 5,000 is what she really pushed for at the end. Now, as for the 2 weeks, you're never going to see that scope memo. I'll tell you why. Because there's no way that the memo can authorize Robert Mueller going after a private lawyer, going after Stormy Daniels, going after a porn star, or going after bank fraud and white-collar crime that occurred 13 years ago. No way, Jose.
The voice of Boston is you. 680 WRKO Boston, 100.7 WZLX HD2 Boston, an iHeart radio station.